Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, our guest is Dan Case. Dan describes himself as a builder. Yeah, he's one of these engineers that if nobody sold exactly what he needed, he designed it and built it. But he gets that from a long career in broadcast engineering and doing a few other side things broadcast related too. It's a really fascinating conversation I'm having with Dan Case coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionic Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. By Nautel, worry-free transmission you can count on with outstanding control, reliability, efficiencies, and Nautel's unmatched 24/7 customer support. Online at nautel.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. Today, we're going to talk about some stuff that goes in between those things, some custom-made stuff and being creative and solving problems. Hey, I'm Kirk Harnack. So glad that you've joined us for our weekly podcast, This Week in Radio Tech. You always hear people on YouTube and Facebook saying, please click like and share and subscribe and all that. And of course, I would very much appreciate that. Get the word out to your fellow engineering friends. I talk to people almost every week who tell me, hey, we listen to your show. My full-time job is with Telos Alliance. And so I get to talk to a lot of broadcasters and even this past week talked to a government agency, a three-letter government agency, and they're getting a new phone system in their PR media department, as quite a few three-letter agencies have done. And it's always cool when somebody says, yeah, we know about you because of the podcast, This Week in Radio Tech. So always good to have my boss on the call when that happens too. So I'm so glad you're with us. It's cicada season here in Middle Tennessee. They are out in force. I just went through the drive-through at McDonald's with my son, and oh my goodness, they were flying around everywhere. Let's hope they're actually good for the environment. So I'm told. I'm told they're good to eat too, but I'm not trying that. All right, enough about me. And Chris Tarr is out today. Chris Tarr apparently had to work overnight last night, solving a problem as only Chris Tarr can do. And he said, "I'm just not going to make it in today. I'm just I'm probably laying down." So it's just me and our guest. And our guest is an amazing guy. I love this his engineering style and his creativity. It's Dan Case. Dan, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. Good to see you.
My privilege to be here, man. The only problem I have is that I didn't know this was going to be live. I figured if I said something stupid, you could edit it out.
Well, if it's really stupid, we can pay Suncast a little extra under the table, and he will cut it out.
Okay. I try not to say stupid things, but.
One time he visited here he's been to Nashville a couple times, and I bought him a hamburger one time, and I thought, hey, this might be good for a couple edits. So anyway, I'm glad that Suncast has a great sense of humor too. But I don't know what I'd do without him. He really produces the show well and does the top and tail. We republish it tomorrow with a proper intro and extra. But yeah, we do put a live version out for the world to see, and anyway, we'll try to be on our best behavior. How about that? So, Dan, are you're retired? Is that right? Almost retired?
Yeah. Officially, I'm retired.
Okay.
Retired after the 5th of May.
Now, is it
to retire?
Go ahead.
I was going to retire at the end of March, but then one of my coworkers had the. Excuse me. Shut up, people.
I know. People go, hey, we see you. We see you on Facebook.
You not get the idea of what it means to go silent? You too here, too. Anyway, now I was supposed to.
That reminds me. I need to turn my phones down, too. There we go. Mm-hmm. All right. My phones are turned down now, too.
And one of my coworkers had the audacity to die. He just didn't show up for work one day, and
oh no,
that left the place I was working in kind of a bind because I was leaving too. So I agreed to stay for another month, and they agreed to put me on a better shift so it wouldn't affect my sleep cycle so much. And
So
it all
we
worked
got
out very good.
our first commercial's coming up, but I want to give a little tease and taste of what's coming up to talk to you about. You describe yourself, in addition to being a broadcast engineer, you've worked at a number of big radio stations, some big markets, some medium markets, but you describe yourself, Dan, as a builder. What does that mean, and what can we expect to learn about you in the next hour?
I just like building stuff. I like coming across problems that there's no solution for. And there might be a solution for it out there somewhere. I've heard it said that anybody with a good checkbook can fix a radio station. Just throw it all out and buy new, I guess. But every time I come across a problem that there's no already built and manufactured and being sold today device to take care of, I just like to roll my own, and then I can customize it to exactly what I need. And the fun part about that is it's kind of like I think if there was another job besides radio, it would be making prototypes of new products. Except that it's not as much fun anymore since all the circuit boards are coming through with surface mount stuff. But anyway, like I was in my first piece was in when I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, in my home. In my first job, we had it was a public radio station, okay, and so we had studios out at several colleges around, and we had mostly classical music and the stuff that whatever these schools produced, and they decided that they were going to do a local talk show, midday talk show, and the next problem that came up was, well, it was 1972, 1973, and they wanted to make phone calls to people, and the wealth of telephone interfaces we have today weren't there.
Yeah.
The only option I could come up with was a really dissatisfying telephone hybrid that the phone company would be willing to lease to me, and that didn't work. So I built my own, and it was not fancy. It was kind of cool though. Everybody thought it was great. All I did was built my own hybrid with transformers, and then put a ducking circuit after it so that the host always wins. And it worked out great.
I love it. And we're going to find out more about that and your start of your career in Erie, Pennsylvania, which reminds me, shout out to our friend Dean Wilson. Hi, Dean. Glad to have you listening, as you always do. Really appreciate you being here. Dean's been a guest on the show, but he was in radio. I don't know if he started in Erie, though. I think he was in a different little town. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack. We're doing This Week in Radio Tech. Dan Case is our guest. We're going to find out more about what the things that Dan has designed, including, as you might guess, you might imagine, that one of the things that has to be designed, or almost always has to be designed from custom, is a tower array switcher, a phasing switcher for directional AM. That's coming up. Our show is brought to you in part by Nautel. And we love Nautel, not only because it sponsors the show. I've got a number of their transmitters at my stations, and maybe you do too. But Nautel's always trying to do things for the broadcast industry, like the Transmission Talk Tuesday roundtable discussions that come up. Right now, though, they want me to let you know about this HD radio digital test drive, HD digital radio test drive. The test drive is an offering intended to break down the barriers keeping many broadcasters from trying HD radio. And frankly, I was one of those, although we didn't know about the test drive. We did this last year. But HD radio transmission does indeed have the potential to create critical presence on the car dashboard and help stations stay competitive in a field of alternative media choices. Now, it's based on Nautel's software-based AirChain technology. HD Radio Digital Test Drive allows broadcasters to trial HD radio transmission in their market for up to 6 months to unlock listeners and content and new revenue potential without needing to install and purchase $40,000 to $50,000 of HD gear. So an easy, minimal cost option to turn HD radio transmission on so broadcasters can test new revenue generating opportunities with their sales teams. You can experiment with new formats or languages or even short-term pop-up stations. I've got a few ideas for those, but my business partners don't like them. You can see the impact on listener retention and engagement when album art or graphics get displayed on the auto dashboard, and that is really cool. You can counter competing alternate media and get real-world market data on up to 6 months of a trial. So what you need to get started? Well, you need to lease or purchase a Nautel GV2 or upgrade your GV transmitter to a GV2. You need an Xperi main station or equivalent license and a signed trial agreement with Nautel. And then you need some content from anywhere from 1 to 4 channels. And you need to deliver that via Livewire or AES67. And there's plenty of ways to get that done. We can help you with that. So check it out from Nautel. Contact your Nautel representative. For a lot of you, that's Jeff Welton, but there are other Nautel representatives, depending on where you are in the U.S. or elsewhere in the world, and they will let you in on this HD digital radio test drive. Thanks, Nautel, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Oh, there's details, too, on their website at nautel.com. All right, I'm Kirk Harnack. Dan Case is our guest. And, Dan, you got started in radio, what, at some probably tender age, I'm guessing, what, 12, 13, 14 years old?
No, it was actually about 18, 19, something like that.
Oh, okay. You could drive. I
was out of high school. It's an extremely long story that I won't get into. I got out of high school and I was going to go to college somewhere, and I chickened out. The whole thing just scared me to death, and I just chickened out of it. When I got up I told my dad about it. When I got up off the floor, he told me that I had a choice. Somewhere in the next 48 hours, I was either going to find a 2-year technical school, or I was going to enroll in the military, enlist in the military. And if I didn't make up my mind, he would make it up for me, and I would not like it if he made up my mind.
Oh my goodness.
So I went to school at ATES Technical School in Erie, Pennsylvania, a school that I don't think is there anymore, but it's a private school. And it's funny, all that math that I had problems with when I was in high school, in high school, I just barely skimmed by on some of that math. But in tech school, I was the top of my class in math.
Oh my gosh.
Because
wow,
I was able to do things with it and see it with my eyes and make things happen with my hands. And it wasn't all theoretical anymore. It was real in front of me. And they told me that after 10 years, I would probably remember, or all of us would probably remember maybe 20 or 25% of what we were taught, because it's stuff that we wouldn't be using in whatever career we went into. And they also told us that we were dumb as a bag of rocks, and we shouldn't be so proud of ourselves. All they really gave us was a piece of paper that gave us the opportunity to get our foot in the door and get a job, and start learning in the real learning environment. Because I don't know how it worked for you, Kirk, but I did my real learning about broadcasting in radio stations and TV stations. I learned stuff from people. There were times that I learned it from engineers who were all the way across the country when I talked to them. But I developed a series of relationships where we could quietly and securely talk to each other about what processing we were using. That was a big deal at the time, and we could exchange tips with each other, and it was a great relationship. I had a great time. That was when I was working for Burbach, and it did a lot for me. But we don't really learn broadcasting in school. Yeah, they might teach you how to talk right. They'll teach you how to have the right kind of voice for radio, but they won't give you the insight into the people you're talking to or the things you're talking about. It's just, they turn out people. They turned out people with first phones. That's the old days. Remember, kids, that was back when I was a young fella. It's not like that anymore, really. But they could turn out people that could make a good a good tape and send it in. But when you put them in the studio and had them talk to someone about something, they were terrible because they didn't really understand what they were doing. I hate it when people talk to. I hate it when people talk on the radio to everybody. Hey, everybody! No,
Yeah.
when I was on the radio, and I did work on the radio and doing voice, when I was on
One
radio,
person.
I talked to one person and only one person. If there were 1,000 of them, there were 1,001 persons.
Yep.
And that's the difference between announcing that works and announcing that's just talking. Anyway, I'm on a rabbit trail. Forgive me. Hold me back. Hold me back.
Well, you mentioned briefly Burback Broadcasting. This was your first foray into a big station group. What, 9 stations or so, and they're based out of Erie?
We had 9 stations. Yeah. Now compare that to the other end of my career, where I had 9 stations, all in Little Rock, and I was for a while the only engineer. We had 9 stations in different markets with Burbach, and that was at the time considered a massive group. And we actually had a pretty good thing going there. I won't comment on when it turned into not such a good thing, but it was about the time that I decided I was going to get out and do something else. That happens, doesn't it? But the cool thing about Burbach is that it was my first real chance to get out and experience all these different markets and all these different people and different equipment, and the difference between successful radio in one market and successful radio in another. And I've come across a lot of engineers that like to fight with their PDs about how the station should sound, and I don't do that. I ask the PD how he wants it to sound, and that's what I do. I might tell him my opinion, but my job is not to tell him what his opinion should be. My job is to do what he wants me to do. And we've had some very successful stations that way. Very successful stations.
That is actually, that's not the first time I've heard that. And I know another engineer who had great success with that, actually in the #1 market in the U.S., in New York City. And he had a PD that he trusted to make good decisions, but he actually ended up, he had a one of the I like the Omnia 6 audio processor, and he installed the remote control software, and he gave him advice, don't go here, don't go there, but please play with it. And the PD came up with a beautiful sound. It happened to be a Spanish music, salsa kind of station, different kinds of Latin music. And wow, he said he really did a great job. So that's interesting that you didn't covet that yourself. You mentioned to me K104 and how you worked on the processing there, and you think that people were trying to copy your processing. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. Let me tell you a quick story, because you'll laugh at it and you'll love it. When I first started there, I was told by the guy who hired me that I was absolutely positive not to touch the audio processing, no matter what. I could make adjustments that had to do with our legality on the air, but he was the guy that does the audio processing. That's all there is to it. Now, I am not mentioning his name out of respect for him. Not that I think he's probably listening, but he had a couple of little flaws in his logic. One of them was he always put his headphones on and listened to a tuner when he was playing with the processing, and that was fine and dandy, except that he was half deaf in one ear. So whenever he got done, the station kind of leaned to one side.
Oh my God.
And if you know the theory behind FM stereo, you know that also not only did it sound terrible coming out of your car radio, it also completely destroyed the stereo separation. So after he did that one day, I just decided, okay, let him fire me if he wants to. I got to fix this. And all I did was I went into it and I just adjusted the L-R, just nulled out the L-R. I did a temporary jumper between left and right in the back of the processor.
Yep.
It was an Optimod.
Yep.
Nulled out the L-R and then just left it alone. And the next morning, he came walking into my office. My office, it was a furnace room, okay? Everybody had to walk past it on the way through the door. So he came to my office and says, "You!" And I'm not going to not quote everything he said, because, we have certain rules of dignity here. But, you blah, 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 blah. I know you've been messing with my processing, haven't you? You've been screwing with my processing. What did you do? It tells you, what have you been doing? What have you done? I said, Bill, really? All I did was null out the L minus R, because you're deaf in one ear and it leans to one side when you do it. And he says, well, you know the part that really ticks me off? It sounds great.
Of course.
and later that day, the memo went out to all markets that there are now 2 people in the company who can adjust processing. One is him, and one is me, in case. And I went on from there to produce some pretty cool stuff for the company. I was K104 in its day, in its heyday, was a really great station. It had a really great sound. It had great people on it. It was well programmed, and it was very well sold, and we all were very happy with the results. But I had people calling me just from the blue, people from all over calling me saying, how do you make K104 sound like that? Can you tell me? I said, no, I can't. And I got to the place that after a while, I went and had a talk with Larry Garrett, who was the president of the company. I said, Larry, I got guys that want to pay me a bunch of money to make their station sound like K104 does. Would you mind if I did some consulting on the side? He says, oh, absolutely not. I knew that he wouldn't mind it because it made him feel better about that pitifully small paycheck he was giving me. But I made a deal with him that as long as they did not have a station in one of our markets, and we're not, and we weren't in our markets or a market where we overlapped to that affected our ratings, I could go for it. Right. And the amazing thing I found was that there were a lot of people who already knew what they wanted and just wanted me to tell them that they were right. And I don't lie to people very well, so I had to tell them the truth. There was a guy that I went to a station, and he was playing country music on, if you remember the old Pacific Recorders cart machines where they had L minus R on one track and L minus R on the other, and they matrixed them on
interesting idea. Yeah.
And it was an interesting idea, but it didn't work with a hoot. It would work in a perfect world where the heads were always right and the tapes were always brand new. But it in reality, it was terrible. I said, well, the first thing you got to do, you start at the solution. I'm sorry. I'm thinking, my brain is thinking faster than my mouth is. The solution to making a radio station sound good starts in the control room. Starts with where the music's coming from, where the mic's coming from, what board it's going through, etc. And I said, what you really need to do if you want to really clean up the sound of the station is go out and invest in a CD library and start playing your music off CDs. It'll make a world of difference. But he just had this thing in his mind that he had to go out and spend $15,000 on processing, like I obviously did up in Erie. So eventually, I made a deal with him, and I had some contacts. I was able to sell him the processing through and make some money at that, and he paid me pretty well to come in and do it. And he was convinced that that was the best sounding radio station in the entire world when I was done. But it's still, you if you put garbage in, you get well compressed and processed garbage out. And let me tell you another story. I got stories. And I got to tell you this one. You'll love this one.
Can I pause you on that one through the next commercial break? Because I want to hear it, and we're going to hear from a couple of our sponsors here in just a second. I do want to expound just myself, just because I have some experience in it, on something that you said, Dan, and that was that Pacific Recorders cart technology. Most cart machines, everybody else put they had a track on the tape for the left channel and a track on the tape for the right channel and a track on the tape for the Q channel that would make the thing stop at the beginning of the endless loop when the commercial or the song was going to start. And that's how cart machines worked. And if you're playback head or your record head was a little out of phase, not perfectly tangential to the tape travel, then you'd get phasing errors on mono radios, well, on stereo radios too. And Pacific Recorders had this idea, well, let's record the left plus right and the left minus right, and we'll use a matrix to do that, and then we'll dematrix it upon playback, and we'll come up with left and right. And there were some advantages to that, but you're right, Dan, when you said everything had to be perfect, because if it wasn't perfect, then it resulted in errors, not only in phasing, but more importantly, errors in frequency response. If this is done, there's been articles written on this, and back, you and I are both old enough to have read those articles, probably back in the 1980s. Or even early 1990s when this tech was still popular. And so it solved one problem, but caused others. And some people swore by it and other people swore at it. So I get where you're coming from. And the point is, now that we have digital recording technology and digital playback technology, it's possible to keep everything in beautiful phase, perfectly aligned left and right. Although some early digital circuits didn't do that. There was a fixed error between left and right. So anyway, we'll get on with that. Hey, our show This Week in Radio Tech, Dan Case is our guest. He's got another story queued up, ready to go right after this commercial break. And we're also going to ask him about a couple things that he invented, like the indirect method of common point impedance adjustment. That's going to be interesting. That's something I know a little bit about, but just enough to be mesmerized by Dan's story. And then, we get an audio logger. Dan invented an audio logger before that was really popular, and a control system for an N+1 frequency agile FM backup. That's coming up too, as well as designing a phasing controller for an AM directional station. All right. Our show This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by Angry Audio. The website is angryaudio.com, and Suncast is going to pop a picture up here, and I'm going to talk about it. That's how this works. Okay. So we talk about Angry Audio and some of the products that they have, and they have so many problem solvers. If these existed when Dan was an up-and-coming engineer, he might not have gotten into building, because they'd make a lot of things that you might think, I need a box that does this. I need something to stick under the desk that does that. And I tell you, Angry Audio makes some amazing things. A couple things they make that I want to mention. It's on the screen right now. It's the CS6 software audio processor. It's Chameleon audio processing, like we've heard Cornelius Gould talk about, but it's in a software version for Mac and for Windows. It's also available as a VST plugin. The CS6 software audio processor is so cool. You want to check this thing out. If you want to play with audio processing, to run audio through, to prep it for streaming, to prep it for maybe some special purpose, check it out. You can really get your live stream to sound great. All your audio streams can sound awesome with the CS6 software audio processor. It's a great deal, and you can demo it too from Angry Audio. So go to the website. It's angryaudio.com, and just click on that picture like Suncast did. There's other things that you may not realize. Wow, I can solve that problem. You may have even forgotten about solving a problem. And I want to mention one other product, and Suncast can click on this. It's the USB audio gizmo. Dan and I were talking about USB audio and how some products just aren't well designed for USB interfacing. Well, this is one of them that is well designed. In fact, it's well designed from two perspectives. It uses the native USB driver that you'll find in a Windows computer or in a Mac computer. In other words, it plugs right in and just works reliably. But the other thing it does is this. It has very special and carefully designed grounding inside, and the audio ground and the computer ground are kept separate. This is one of Mike Dosh's real specialties, is designing audio circuits that are super quiet and have great dynamic range. And so Mike Dosh, Catfish as some people call him, has designed this box. It's heavy, it is quiet, and it produces absolutely beautiful audio, as good as you can possibly get analog audio into and out of a USB interface. I've used this to solve a number of problems at radio stations and here at my own lab when I was getting some noises. Where's that coming from? Oh, that's the grounding problem that we often see with analog interfaces to USB. I went into my kit, got the demo unit that Catfish loaned to me, and bam, absolutely beautiful audio. Check it out from Angry Audio. The website is angryaudio.com. Now, speaking of things that you need to get your job done. Max Connect, they're another one of our sponsors. And Max Connect, we've been associated with Max Connect now for, oh my goodness, must be 4 years or so, maybe 5. Josh Bone is a contract engineer. He's a station owner, and he owns Max Connect. And let me tell you, they do some amazing, amazing things. Suncast is going to bring up a picture from Max Connect. They have expanded their range of things that they do. And, we've talked about Max Connect from the point of view of the LTE wireless data, internet connection that they can provide to you, because Josh has made special deals with the different cell phone carriers to get you high priority packetized data and fixed IP addresses. So that works great for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts. And I've used it to save some stations bacon, I'll tell you. Also, Max Connect makes this U192 interface box that lets you get super high quality composite or MPX signal out of a computer that's running a software FM processor. But in addition to all that, on your screen right now, you see all the services that they've added at Max Connect. You can they will do for you studio construction. They've been doing a big studio job in Indianapolis. They do transmitter installation, and great jobs of that. One thing that they do is, I've never been just a huge fan of getting the remote control systems all hooked up and working. It's kind of drudgery work for me, although I always was good at programming those things. Max Connect will come in and really give you a fantastic interface between your transmitters and other equipment at the transmitter site and your remote control system. They can also do site monitoring and control too. You can just have them take over that and keep track of trends and warn you when things are about to go wrong. They do streaming services too, audio processing setup, and even NRSC measurements. Don't forget about those. At Max Connect, the website, I know it's spelled funny. It's on your screen, MAXXKONNECT. It's in our show notes as well. Thank you so much, Josh Bone, for making Max Connect, which is now part of the Triple Helix group. We'll talk about that in a future show. All right, Dan Case is our guest today. Dan, you had a story right on tap. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
In fact, this dovetails with what you said just before the break. Remember the audio processor that Harris made that was about, I don't know, maybe a foot high and a rack unit wide, and had 1,000 controls on it?
I forget what. It have a lot of LEDs on it too.
Yeah, was it MX1, MS1? I don't know, but it was MS100. It was supposed to be.
Yeah,
it could be. I never actually had one, but I've seen a few of them, and that's what this is about in a way. It's got so many adjustments on it that someone that really knows what they can do can make some amazing sound with it, and someone that doesn't can make a radio station sound like hammered, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it was horrible. And there was an AM radio station in Erie that had that problem. And their engineer sat back in the transmitter room. He would sit back there all day long with his headphones on, tweaking this audio processor, trying to get the best sound out of it. And the more he tweaked it, the worse it sounded. Finally, they got to the place where that engineer was encouraged to find another job. And then they got a replacement local guy that they hired. And a couple days later, I tuned in that station, and it sounded great. Wow. I said, I got to find out what this guy did. I said, I went to, remember, this was in the era when everybody was using cart machines for music.
Right.
They were an AM, but they had stereo carts and the stereo studio for their AM. They were very forward looking. They're unfortunately too forward. But I ran across one. I said, I got to know, what did you do to make Jet sound so great? And he said, oh, nothing really special. I just aligned all the cart machines.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's the little things. It's the simple things that when you add them all up, make radio sound great. It's, little things like, some of the fine adjustments on the mic processor. I believe that mic processors should all be locked up where talent can't get to them unless the talent is qualified enough to know what they're doing with them. Because, you go in and you get it set and everybody's happy. And then 2 days later, it sounds terrible again. And you go in and somebody's adjusted it. Uh, little adjustments that you don't think are that important can make a huge difference by the time it gets down the line to a transmitter. And just because it's digital doesn't mean that that's less important. It's all the little stuff that really makes a difference.
Yeah,
that's my experience.
I would agree. Agree completely. And it does seem that with digital, there's fewer things that count as little stuff, but there are still little stuff things that do count. And while you're working, I want to hear about the indirect method of common point impedance adjustment. While you're formulating that story, I just want to mention that you and I had the same experience, slightly different. I was hired as the engineer for WEZI FM in Memphis, Tennessee, actually licensed at Germantown. And one thing that the manager told me, he said, you know, I drive around town and we'll sound great for a while, and then there'll be a lot of, I said multipath. Yeah, I think that's what you call it, multipath. Be a lot of multipath for about 12 to 14 minutes. And then we'll have a period of time when we don't have multipath. He said, would you check the transmitter? I said, yeah, I'll be glad to check the transmitter, just to make him happy. But of course, what I was going to check is the reel-to-reel playback machine, because they used what they called matched flow. Yeah. So it was easy listening, but it wasn't one song at a time. It was 3 or 4 songs at a time from a tape that had a 12 to 14 minute cut of music that were meant to flow with each other. So they had some old the big Scully machines that were vertical in the rack with the big they could handle the 14-inch, the huge reels. That we were just using the standard reels. And I got to looking at them, and the one that was messing up, I could tell. I put the test tape on there, it took 2 seconds to figure out the heads are way out of whack, and mechanically the screws were all loose, and it was just a disaster. So I got it all back together, put it all back together, got it adjusted, got it playing back just fine, and I didn't look at the transmitter that night, didn't touch it. The next day, the manager said, wow, we sound great. He said, yeah, what was wrong with the transmitter? I said, a couple adjustments, not much.
Yep.
It's okay.
One of the guys who worked for me when I was at Burbach, one of the market engineers, was having a problem with one of the stations. And I went up and looked at it, and I said, look, I'm going to leave you with a kit of everything you need to fix this problem. And I left him a bottle of alcohol and a pack of Q-tips.
What Q-tips? Swabs and alcohol. That's right.
Yeah. Clean the heads, please.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway. So
so this indirect method of common point impedance measurement. What is that?
Measurement. No, I actually came up with that on the fly, but what I was doing behind it was sound. We had an inspector come in to look at this station in Corey, Pennsylvania that I worked at. And he asked me, well, how do you know what your common point impedance is? You don't have a bridge here or anything. I said, oh, I know, it's 50 ohms J0. Well, how do you know that? I said, well, I use the indirect method. He says, what? Huh? I said, look, I've got a dummy load here. It's 50 ohms. It's been tweaked a little bit, so it's 50 ohms J0. Now, if I operate this transmitter into that 1 kilowatt dummy load up there, and note what the plate voltage, plate current, and antenna current is, and then switch it over to the phaser, and I fine-tune the phaser common point adjustments so that the transmitter has the same plate voltage, plate current, and common point, then by default, it has to be 50 ohms J0. And he stood there for a minute and said, and he said, damn, that works. I've never heard of it before, but I can't flag you on that one. There was
I guess the first question in my mind is there any combination of R and J that's not 50 and 0 that would result in the same plate voltage, plate current, and antenna current? And I suspect that there's part of my brain says, well, yeah, you could fool that, but I don't know. But I don't know the right math or how. I guess
Well,
it was good enough for the FCC guy for that.
Yeah, in the old transmitters where we had a lot of tuning devices that aren't in some of the new solid state transmitters, you could. I don't think any of them were equipped to tune that far off that they could do that. Although I've seen transmitters do some pretty odd things.
And of course, you're talking about keeping the transmitter tuning exactly the same while you switch the loads and make sure that the transmitter readings would stay the same too. And you would think that let's say resistance went down a couple ohms and J went up, you'd think that probably it's going to result in a little bit different characteristics in the final tube circuit. And again, you're leaving the tuning, you have to leave the tuning adjustments alone on the transmitter. Otherwise you are fooling yourself. So that's the indirect method of common. So you're checking it against a standard, a dummy load that you know is 50-0.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was amazing. It actually worked. I think he probably made a note that the engineer at the WWCB is crazy, but he passed us anyway. There was another part of that inspection, by the way, where we were out looking at the monitor points for the AM directional, and he's looking at the monitor points that we had measured, and he said, "Well, there's one thing for darn sure. I'm not going to be able to cite you for being overpower. I'm not going to be able to cite you for, for exceeding your allowed coverage area."
Okay.
I'm surprised anyone can hear this radio station.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So, hey, anyway. I suspect that your story about designing and building a phaser control system for what is it, KAAY? Is that it?
KAAY.
I suspect that's going to take a few minutes to tell, and I want to hear the whole thing. So tell you what I want to do, Dan. I want to go ahead and take our next commercial break now. I'm sorry it's so close to the other one, and that'll give us a good 10, 12 minutes or so to hear about that design and any other ones that you want to talk about. So we're talking to Dan Case. Dan's been around a few markets: Erie, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Little Rock, Arkansas. He's worked for a number of different large broadcasters and always been the kind of guy who's wanted to design solutions when off-the-shelf solutions didn't exist. And, it seems like for the most part, we have a lot of off-the-shelf stuff now, although not all of it may be exactly what you think you need. So there's still, a reason to design some things. Anyway, we're going to get more from Dan here in just a moment. Our show is brought to you in part by our friends at Broadcast Tools. Broadcast Tools is represented by a number of dealers, but you got to love Broadcasters General Store. They really do a bang-up job of getting you the best prices and making sure that when your delivery is going to be. How quickly can you get your product? Well, Broadcast Tools makes a lot of things, as you know. Don Wingett at Broadcast Tools, a lot like Dan Case here in designing things that broadcasters need. One of the things that Dan has is the IO Sentinel 4 G2. That's a lot of letters in there, but here's very specifically what it is. It's a web-based GPIO interface, and it's bidirectional, and it can connect on the other end to, you can connect it with a web browser, but you can also put another IO Sentinel 4 G2 at the other end of an IP connection and basically have a very long GPIO connection between two sites if you need to. So it's a robust and full-featured Ethernet-based data acquisition and remote control device. It has 4 optically isolated static or logic inputs and 4 programmable relays. So these are actual hard relays. The IO Sentinel's 4 optically isolated status or logic inputs can be configured for wet or dry contact closure monitoring. The 4 1-amp SPDT, single pole, double throw relay outputs can be configured for on, off, pulsed, or reboot operation. And it can be controlled and monitored locally or remotely over any IP network, including private networks or IP-based industrial control networks, or over the internet. And users can operate the product using a web browser or a web-enabled mobile device. Yes, you could use your cell phone to check status and to control things. Email notification can be configured to alert up to 8 email or SMS email addresses, and logging of system status along with the site ID can be emailed in time spans, once an hour to once a day. It also has SNMP traps and set get to allow multiple units to be monitored and controlled with SNMP management software. That's why Chris Tarr likes this thing so much. So check the, and you can also put a second unit at another location or on the same network if you need, and have yourself basically a GPIO snake that you can still browse into, but you can also point two units at each other and have them talk to each other. Really cool. I mean, what a great idea. And there's some, certainly, I mean, can you imagine what you would use this for? You know, I didn't even know this existed until a couple of months ago when we started talking about this particular product from Broadcast Tools. Of course, if you have any need for broadcast tools or other gear, you should contact my friends at Broadcasters General Store. Their website, bgs.cc. And man, they are just good folks. They carry a whole lot of different gear. They do carry Telos, Omnia, Axia gear, as well as other manufacturers too. They're really set up, I got to tell you, they're set up very well to handle your phone call. Sometimes, you know, you're driving down the road, you think, oh, yeah, I've got to order such and so for this station. I need a replacement CD player, or, you know, I need to talk about a new audio processor or whatever it may be. Call them. They are absolutely set up to take your phone call, talk to you. You almost never get put on hold there. Somebody's going to pick up the phone and talk to you right away at 352-622-7700 for Broadcasters General Store. 352-622-7700. Thanks a lot, BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. I personally really appreciate you. Okay, it's Kirk Harnack. We're talking to Dan Case. And Dan, I want to hear this story about designing something that years ago, I dealt with a custom designed, gorgeous controller for a site in Paducah, Kentucky. And it had daytime, critical hours, and nighttime. And it was a beautifully built masterpiece of electronics. The inputs and outputs looked to be surge protected. It almost never failed. The only problem is there was absolutely zero documentation about the whole thing. None. And I was kind of a young budding engineer, and luckily I didn't have to figure it out. One time it burned up, and I just replaced the things that had smoked, and it went back to working. Tell me about designing a custom phaser controller for a directional AM radio station.
Well, the thing is, you know, there are a lot of places where you can get phaser controllers. We put a brand new phaser in this station, Kentronic phaser, beautiful piece of work. But to save money, we decided not to get a controller from them or from anyone else. We decided we would just roll our own because I had rolled so many other controllers using the same basic circuitry and concepts. The things we had to do there were daytime, nighttime. Daytime was one tower, non-directional. Nighttime was all three. And because we were 50 kilowatts, we needed to have one of the end towers set up to be the temporary non-directional when we were doing maintenance. And I just sat down and at the computer and started drawing out the circuit and making it work. I will admit that I use a lot of relays in that because when it comes to a lightning strike, there's nothing like a good old relay. It always scared me, and I mean we have a Nautel transmitter there now too. Well, they have a Nautel transmitter there now too, and there's lots of microprocessor stuff in that, and it continues to work beautifully as far as I know. But for something like a control system that's got cables that are underground that go out to 500-foot towers, and all the possible places where they could pick up surges from lightning and such, there's no real substitute for having a good old-fashioned relay in there. Now, it's not all relays. Where I could, I used other forms of switching, and logic. But I was very proud with what I came up with. Part of the reason I'm so proud of it is that I came up with a very reasonable user interface, and that's something I'm really picky about. is user interfaces. I knew that not always would I be the one in there pushing the buttons on it, and we would be operating it remotely. I just wanted it to have a nice, reasonable, sensible user interface. I've seen so many pieces of broadcast software and hardware that were designed by guys with good hearts and well-meaning, and they designed this piece that could do this, but people who weren't well educated with it about it would walk up to it and feel like they had to learn how to speak in machine language to make it work. And I just hate to do that to people. The example of that actually is the control system for the N+1. We had a situation where one of our big FMs there had an antenna flame out, and the transmission line was this old 6-inch RCA line that was there since 1940 something, and that we inherited. We started using it because it happened to be there, and that thing flamed out, and we were going to be off the air for quite a while. And we found a transmitter in one of the other markets that was a brand new Nautel, that a 10 kilowatt FM that had been sent there for a project that got canceled and never happened. So it was just sitting there on the pallet waiting for something to happen. And we got it sent up to Little Rock and put it out at one of our other sites that was in the right place to be able to serve a large area. And we kind of had the idea that once we got this other station back on the air, we know we had the idea because we got a broadband antenna from ERI, but we had the idea that we would turn it into an N+1 after we got that other station on. Now the thing is that yes, the transmitter can change frequencies very easily. All it takes is a contact closure. But in order to the way things were set up back at the studio, in order to put the appropriate audio on it, we had to trust an operator to go out and put a set of patch cords in the patch bay in the right places. And you wouldn't know for sure that they had the right audio going to it until you turned it on. And that can be, when you've got radically different formats that don't always get along with each other, that can be a really difficult problem. So, I mean, I won't tell you any of those stories because, Anyway, I wanted to come up with a simplified system that could just push this button and the transmitter goes on over here. That's your backup. And what I ended up with was a single rack unit on each end with a row of buttons. I think there were 6. I remember right, there were 6 possible frequencies we could tune it to. So I went ahead and set it up for 6, even though we didn't need that many. Had that row of buttons, and you push that button, and the unit at the studio would connect the right audio to it, or that button wouldn't latch in. There was we had interlocking there at the transmitter end, and it was connected over an RS-232 port on a I can't remember the name now. The name of the IP unit that we were using for the audio. But we at the transmitter end, you could walk up to it and push the button, and it wouldn't switch the transmitter frequency or do anything until it had the right audio coming from the studio. So it's literally impossible to put that transmitter on the air with the wrong audio. Made perfectly good sense to me, and it was one of those things that and you know how you make these things happen. Sometimes you use bits and pieces and parts and stuff that other people designed and built, and the RS-232 relay boards and stuff. But it came together very nicely, very reliably, I had it set up so we could remote control it. And we never put that unit out where operators could get to it. We wanted, if it had this change, we wanted an engineer involved in it just because just so we knew, and just so nobody went out and said, "Hey, you know what? If I turn this on too, I mean, yeah, I got 100,000 watts over here, but if I turn this on over here, it might give me a better signal." Not realizing that what it would actually do is cancel out part of the signal.
Yeah.
So yeah, we kept it locked up, but it was the ultimate, I think, protection system from that embarrassing that embarrassing hip hop on the talk station, and even worse, talk radio on the hip hop station.
Well, that really sounds like an intelligent design feature, that it wouldn't turn the transmitter on without the right audio.
And it wouldn't switch the audio unless the transmitter was selected. If either of them got unselected for any reason, it went down.
Yeah.
And the thing that amazed me is, as many people as I know have N+1 backups. There was nothing on the market that did that.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. So it was either build it or take your chances. Taking your chances isn't always a good idea.
That is an interesting thought. I've got one transmitter site where we do have kind of an N+1 for some of our stations. And I really hadn't thought about, well, we can change the frequency on the transmitter. It goes into a wideband FM antenna, and that works fine. But yeah, we got to make sure the right audio is on it. So that would be an interesting if then else proposition.
Yeah.
And you're right. I don't think that exists.
Yeah. Somewhere out there it should, because I know more than one market that has an N+1 or that needs one. I know a few that need one that probably didn't do it for just this reason. Instead they waited till they got a new transmitter and turned their old transmitter into a standby, and that's all. That's great. We had standby transmitters everywhere, but when your 12-bay antenna flames out, you're done. You're off the air.
Yeah. You're off the air for a long time.
It doesn't. It doesn't really matter what else you got up there.
When that 12-bay flames out, it's not good for any frequency.
Absolutely.
It can't be part of your N+1. We're talking to Dan Case. Dan is retired now, but he's had a lengthy career in broadcast engineering and a few other things in broadcasting. But he describes himself as a builder. So he designs things that really solve a problem. Dan, we're going to take our last quick break here. And actually, this last break, the Broadcast Bionics, they're a company that actually thinks a lot like you do. And when we come back for our little final short segment, Dan, think of a tip of the week or something that you'd like to leave our listeners and viewers with, something, just a good nugget of wisdom that if you could pass along in a couple minutes, that would be great. Broadcast Bionics, as I mentioned, they would get along very well with Dan, because when they see a need for something out there that's not invented yet, they invent that. And one of the things that I've been really interested in the past few years is virtualizing broadcast equipment infrastructure. Just as, these days, our cell phones now do the same thing that, take the place of dozens of hardware products that we used to use and buy. That Radio Shack ad where they show you from 25 years ago, all these different, Bearcat scanner and all these different products. Portable CD player and calculator and all that stuff. And now your phone does all that. Broadcast Bionics looked at the whole idea of virtualizing using Docker containers of different broadcast infrastructure. And certainly my employer, Telos Alliance, is doing this with audio consoles, audio processing, intercom systems, phone systems, things like that. Oh, and now profanity delays are available in that format. Broadcast Bionics looked at this and they said, you know what? That's very cool, except one thing. It's kind of complicated to set up Docker containers and have them be reliable, get the CPU use that they need, the access that they need. This isn't transaction processing. This is real-time audio processing. And so Dan McQuillan and his crew at Broadcast Bionics came up with something called Virtual Rack. What they've done is they've taken a bona fide server computer platform, and of course, it's running Linux as its core, which is what's needed to run these different products, not only from Telos Alliance, but also from Sound 4 and 2WCOM, and I'm sure others are coming. And it takes the difficulty out of setting these up. So you can get the virtual rack, comes in two different sizes from Broadcast Bionics, and it's got kind of like an app store. You pick out the broadcast applications that you want. It could be an Axia Altus audio console or a Telos VXS, or it could be the Forza audio processor with the FM one coming down the pike soon, or even a product from Sound 4 or 2WCOM. And you click on it, and it installs the latest version of that in a Docker container in the virtual rack. And not only that, it sets up the networking internally, which can be pretty complex. I'll tell you that for sure. It does that for you, lets you make configuration changes if you need to. And by the way, you can usually make configuration changes without having to reboot the whole computer, just restart the container you're working on. Now, you still need to license that product from its respective manufacturer, like Telos Alliance or Sound 4, 2WCOM. Of course, you need to do that separately. You're not buying all these different products, but you are buying the ability to run them easily and then provide backup. If you want to buy a second unit, you can have full backup with complete monitoring of both systems. Virtual Rack is just an amazing product, and it super simplifies the process of putting virtual containerized broadcast products on the air, in your air chain. Hey, I'm doing this. I'm doing it the Telos Alliance way with my own server, because, I kind of have an inside track to Telos Alliance. But if I was doing this on my own and I wasn't a Telos Alliance employee, I would definitely be considering very hard this virtual rack from Broadcast Bionics. Serious about that. Check it out. You go to the website, bionic.co.uk, or Bionics, sorry, with an S, bionics.co.uk. Click on Virtual Rack. There's some videos at the bottom of that page. You can click and hear Dan McQuillan talk about that. We also talked to Dan about a year ago here on This Week in Radio Tech, so check that out. All right. Appreciate Broadcast Bionics sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. They got lots of other cool stuff, too. All right, we just got another 2 or 3 minutes with Dan Case. Dan, what would you like to leave our viewers and listeners with from your years of broadcast engineering?
I've got to say that thing from Bionics is incredible. I love it. It's cool. It's just brilliant. I wish I'd have thought of it.
I got to tell you, our engineers, our develop guys at Telos, they were a little skeptical at first because they know how hard it is to really properly set up a Docker container that does what we need it to do. And so we got a copy of the Bionics Virtual Rack at Telos Alliance, and our guys went, "Wow, this is really good. This is really cool."
Yeah. And if it works, it works,
It does. Yeah. So sage advice.
Yeah. Sage advice. Well, I've worked a total of about 50 years in broadcasting. Some of it's been in TV. Sad to say, the last 4 or 5 years of my life, I went back to the job I had at my very first broadcast station, board operator, master control operator. It was a little bit different because, back then we had quad VTRs and film chains and slide projectors. And and today it's a whole different beast. But I've learned a lot of things along the way about working as an engineer or as an operator. Operating in the place I was at, it was actually a sort of a semi-engineering thing. And when I started, it was all engineering back in 1973. But I hear so many guys that, you get talking to them, it's all that stupid general manager, rah, 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 or, those stupid people at corporate, rah, 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 rah. The thing is, well, to start with, they're there. Either you got to work with them or choose not to work for them. Because if you don't work with them, eventually you probably won't be working for them. If you get my drift. This is not a them and us thing. You've got to have the same vision they've got. If they want this place to make money, you should want it to make money too. If that's why I actually invented a term called revenue insurance. Have you ever heard of that? Yeah,
No.
that's backup generators, backup transmitters. In some cases, a backup studio that you can put on any station at any time if something blows up.
Yeah.
And my GM at the time, I had a great relationship with my GM at the time, Jim Beard, and he thought that was brilliant. In fact, after that, he made me, pretty much put me in charge of all the capex for everything in the building because he liked the way I thought through it. And the way I thought through it was, well, people actually called and asked me, how do you get everything that you asked for approved? Well, number one, don't ask for anything stupid.
Yeah.
If you ask for stupid things, the people at corporate will think you're stupid, and whatever you're asking for must be stupid, therefore. And number two, I built relationships with the people in the chain between me and the top, where I could get feedback on whether this is going to fly or not, off the record feedback. And I could have them say, no, that's not going to work unless you do this and this and this. And I would send it up. And after a while, I said, everything we get from Dan is pretty good. We don't have to spend near as much time vetting it because we seem to trust him. Now, that was, an owner ago, but, when you change owners, everything changes. But the point there is, my focus there was not just making my engineering shop work the best. Having, it wasn't like I was in my little silo, my little tent out in the woods, where engineering was, and everybody should just stay away. I worked with programmers, and I worked with air talent, and I worked with salespeople and managers and people at corporate to do my part in the overall goal for the company. Now, that said, I miss the days of mom and pop radio. Yes, I do. That's when I fell in love with radio, and the way radio is today, sometimes it's hard to have the same warm, fuzzy feelings for it. But if you want to work in this business, you need to, even if you are a low-level, entry-level engineer, you need to think like a manager. One of the best managers I ever worked for taught me how to manage up. People don't think about that, but you have to manage up as well as manage down. The first time I walked into his office with a proposal I wanted to spend some money on, he looked at me and said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because it's what we need to do." "Well, but why?" Because it's important. Because it's what. And he said, "Yeah, but why should I spend money on it?" And
you got to be ready. You got to be ready with that.
How am I going to make money by doing this? If I can't make money or save money, I'm not going to do it. And this was those smaller radio stations, but the same thing works with bigger radio stations. You got to get into that team, even if they're not making a team environment, you make a team environment. You couple up with other people in other departments and work together to make the whole thing work. Because there are parts of it that you can do that nobody else can do. And the thing that bothers me the most is that engineers get a really bad rap. Everybody thinks that we're fat and ugly and don't bathe often enough. And that's absolutely not true.
I mean,
in some cases that is true, but all right,
Dan, we are out of time. I'm about to get the hook around the neck, and Suncast is gonna get me out of here. Thank you so much. I love your last bit of advice. Act like a shareholder, even if you're kind of not. But if you have a job with a company, you are kind of a shareholder. Dan Case has been our guest here. Dan, thank you. Yeah, appreciate you joining us today.
If you're going to spend their money, spend it like it was yours.
Yes, exactly. Hey, Dan Case has been our guest. Suncast has been our producer. I'm Kirk Harnack, and we're going to be back next week with another great adventure on This Week in Radio Tech. In fact, Shane Toven is going to join us. He's got some amazing adventures he's been on lately, so stay tuned for that next week. We'll see you next week on This in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.